Okay, so Bentley here. Good evening to you. On behalf of the Calgary Climate Hub, I welcome you to our second season of A Climate Change, our now monthly live cast exploring with thought leaders from across Canada what these wildly unprecedented times mean for addressing the climate crisis here in Alberta and how to create the meaningful change that we need. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Yaqsi Nakota Nations, the Métis Nations of Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. I'd also like to make a second land acknowledgement on behalf of another group of folks that have a stake in this land that we stand on today, and that is our children, our nieces and nephews, grandchildren, and all future generations. I urge you to keep them in mind during this time as we face unprecedented change and start making decisions about what comes next. For those of you watching tonight via Facebook Live or on the Zoomcast, please feel free to post some questions for our guests. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Should you wish me to not say your name, please type the word anonymous before your question, as this show will be shared to our social networks. Otherwise, we'll assume your consent and the use of your name in this broadcast. Tonight's guest is Maskwasis Boysis of the Calgary chapter of Idle No More. Idle No More started in November of 2012 amongst treaty people in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, protesting the Canadian government's dismantling of environmental protection laws, endangering First Nations who live on the land. Born out of face-to-face organizing and popular education, but fluent in social media and new technologies, Idle No More has connected the most remote reserves to each other and to urbanized Indigenous people and to the non-Indigenous population. For me personally, when I get a chance to say it, I tell people that my entire life I've heard Indigenous cultures and voices urging a relationship with the land and our fellow creatures. And at this phase, who can possibly say that we're wrong? What I would say to Maskwasis and to all within range of my voice is that I've gone from hearing to listening, and I'm sorry it's taken me for so long. It gives me great pleasure to share this platform tonight with Maskwasis Boysis. Welcome to A Climate of Change.
Great to be here. Excited to be here.
Did I get anything wrong about Idle No More or any of that in my introduction here?
No, it's perfect. I like it.
Okay, great. Okay, well, maybe, to begin with, I'm just going to give you a platform to speak a little bit about your experience, about Indigenous and climate here in Alberta. It's your floor.
Sure, thank you. So Idle No More Calgary, they're different. Every city has different people working within their under Idle No More. So here we started a few years ago with Heather Lucier, Francis Young, and Michelle Robinson, and myself. Pretty much just we started out with the resistance campaign, and that's basically they call it the White Paper 2.0. The Trudeau government was trying to pass. It's the Indigenous Rights Framework. Basically, from what I understand, it's about trying to make Indigenous nations municipalities, which when Indigenous nations were actually our own nations, sovereign nations, like our chiefs should be treated like prime ministers kind of thing, right? So we're kind of resisting that. And for Idle No More, my family back home, my cousin, he always tells me, your family was never idle. Your great grandfathers fought in wars against the Canadian government at the Battle of Loon Lake, the last military engagement on Canadian soil. And my late dad used to always go to community meetings and just have it out with these oil company guys who are chopping down trees that have prints on them, and those are sacred prints on trees. So my family has never been idle. They've always been in it, and I guess it just runs in my blood. You got to keep on resisting. And this is a lot of the words that I use. You're going to see it from an Indigenous perspective. It's so like colonization. That's one of the words that's used, and instead of Canada, we refer to it as Turtle Island, right? So it's a little different. and people just got to see it from our perspective, I guess. You talk about Indigenous worldviews, for one thing. How you see the world basically shapes how you treat the world. If you see it as a commodity rather than a living, organism that supports all the life on it, you're just going to go and tear that mountain apart and make bricks and buildings and all these things, right? There's creation stories as well. You can't understand Indigenous people unless you go back to creation stories as well. That's really important thing. We a lot of creation stories believe that, from Indigenous people around the world, they believe that we come from the earth. We are the earth, so we're a part of it, right? We don't just live on it. So, and yeah, these ways are have been around since the Paleolithic age with animism, our belief system. That's the closest I've heard anybody describe our belief system. In the Cree language, we call it Nehio Pakatinkoswan, and that's our belief system. Basically means that everything has a spirit, and like everything is animate, like rocks, water, the air, all of these things, they all have spirits. Even our words have spirits, so what we say affects everything as well. So just a little background on just so people can understand a little better. A lot of people, they don't have that background, and then when you go into talking about some of these things, it just helps you understand a little better, little deeper. So
Yeah, when I think about everything having spirits, I spend a little bit of time reading Einstein and looking at science. And one of the things that you don't think about is that, what he said was that mass and energy are the same. So a rock is energy. Everything is energy. And we just see something solid. We just think of something solid. And I feel like, in some ways, the Indigenous perspective is closer to science than the traditional white, or I'm going to use your terminology, colonial outlooks. And of course, that's one way in which the Indigenous perspective you could link to traditional science, and of course the other being that this respect for the land and the animals, it's only become more clear and more obvious that we really have to start doing something. We're in the middle of a mass extinction due to how we are running things. And so I mean, and then you throw COVID into the mix. So actually, so let me back up to COVID for a second,
sure.
because for a little while there's a lot of people that I knew who are saying, like, the COVID part's sort of done. We've all adapted. And to me, from the get-go, I was saying, we haven't adapted to anything. We haven't even seen it at its worst yet. Wait until the fall. And here we are. And so, panning back, I've asked all of my guests the question of, what's the teachable moment from when COVID hit and the whole world stopped for a little while. But I haven't asked an Indigenous man yet, and I'd be very interested in how your perspective might have been different from mine or other people that look like me.
Yeah, it's the colonial world, the colonial systems that were set up here, in industrial revolution. It's been going for about 150 years. Indigenous people, I believe it was like something like 100. We've been here around 130,000 years. That's just how far they dated it back. But in our ways, we know we've been here since time immemorial, since the land was created, and we were created along with the animals and all the plants and all that. And it's with the industrial revolution, we've been here that long, like 103,000 years, and then Canada is only like 150 something years old. Since the founding of North America, It's 500 years. So
Yeah.
I'd say about maybe 400 to 300 years. That's how long it took to start making things go downhill, and for 130,000 years, we've been here and we've been keeping this land pristine, leaving it better for the future generations who found it. That's a big part of our belief system is only taking what you need. Like you're talking about the circular economy and all that. You want to discuss that? That's a part. We've been doing that for a long time. We only take what we need. We always leave things better than when we found it. So, it makes you think that maybe the original inhabitants of these lands should be given control of these lands and at least have a say at a seat at the table as well when there's decisions being made about these lands.
Mhm.
So yeah, there like so many things. Like you look at COVID, um, the pollution, like the smog in some areas, like LA, like in China, it cleared up,
Yeah.
but there's um, people had a break for a few months. The people with asthma, things like that, with conditions, they'd have a break, cleaner air to breathe for a few months. But that's out of years and years of pollution, right?
Yeah.
Same with waters as well. Waterways cleared up in some places, like where was that? Venice, I believe I'd seen. Their canals were clearing up. There was like fish you can actually see in there, and
Yeah. I think there was dolphins swimming the channels.
yeah,
Uh, yeah.
you don't see
Yeah.
that every day. So I,
No,
I
no.
guess
Yeah.
that's one of the positives, I guess, of all of this happening. In our ways, I heard an elder say that even that COVID sickness most likely has a spirit as well. And I was in a sweat lodge, and he was talking about that, and he said you can pray to that sickness as well, just as you can pray to like other things like cancer and things, right? Because they're alive as well. You can ask them to
You,
take it easy on us, things like that. So
you know, I consider myself to be a fairly well educated person. I read books even though I don't have to, and I investigate things as they pop up in the world. And I realized with COVID, I didn't really understand what a virus was. And it's a fascinating thing, but I hadn't thought about treating that as a living thing that you could make a appeal to. That's an interesting thought. Um, do you feel like do you think this, because COVID is this worldwide thing that we all have to address even though we don't want to? Do you feel like maybe this is going to help trigger us moving into some of the things that we need to move into, or are we going to work twice as hard to ignore it? I mean, it's sort of a crystal ball question I'm asking you. I mean, is this when people look back 100 years from now, 500 years from now, will they say COVID was one of the things that helped us shift on climate and shift on things like the Indigenous perspective?
definitely, it's I look at things like people moving back to land-based teachings. People are growing gardens now that haven't ever gardened before. It just makes us think about these things, right? It makes us start to take action on them. Maybe even people are moving away from consuming meat, and they're choosing making better choices as consumers as well, right? And
Yeah.
it's I think in the future it's you know it, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen, pretty much where we're at, right?
Yeah.
So we're already sliding down that slope, and this is just a little precursor where we can start making these little changes in our lives. People will be pretty much moving out of cities due to flooding. So a lot of cities are going to be flooded, within a few decades here. So the coastal cities, at least, right? Like food production, things like that. People will be moving into the country.
Hmm.
Countries like Russia and Canada, they're going to be swarmed, with global warming. Places are going to get too hot, right? And
Yeah.
we have the climate, the colder climate. So that's pretty much what's going to happen. But I'm loving what I'm seeing. Like, I go visit family with my wife out in Saskatchewan, and they're growing big gardens out there at their homes, right? So that was really great to see.
Yeah, I think that's one of it's one of the things that people are starting to turn to, and I'd say there's a handful of things that people are starting to really turn to that are positive for climate, and I would say to the Indigenous, a more Indigenous styled future. I think a lot more people are conscious. I know that when COVID first hit, and we were trying to figure out, whether we were going to keep the borders open with America, and the numbers were going through the roof, and people were trying to, it was probably the time where the most humans on earth were at the same time thinking about things like supply chains, and we get all our stuff from down there and from them, and they're run by I'm going to call a crazy person, whatever the term you want to call it. That was, for a little while, that was part of the decision making processes. We don't want to upset that fellow who's the president, and so I think it made a lot of people think about the systems, and so my hope is that ends up being the change. What I want to ask you about, how the Indigenous communities, I would say specifically in Alberta, but anywhere in Turtle Island would be fine. Um, how has COVID affected those communities as compared, you think, to the rest of us?
Yeah, I know down in the States, the Navajo reservations, they were really hit hard. They're one of the highest hit communities in all of the U.S. Um, my the nation where I'm from, um, Samson Cree Nation and Maskwasis, they have high numbers as well, higher than the neighboring communities of Wetaskiwin and Ponoka. So yeah, it's a lot of people. We got to get used to the idea of start wearing masks, start staying home more often. Um, the relief packages we got from the federal government as well. They come to us, and most people, all we see is $100 gift card from our band, right?
Yeah.
And how far does $100 go for months of a pandemic, right? So it's yeah, there's like boil water advisories out there all across Turtle Island. People are going without clean water. That's an essential thing. Like, it makes it harder to stay home.
Yeah.
Harder to hunker down when you don't have clean water like that. But I think, like where I'm from in Pigeon Lake, we kind of get excluded from our band, Samson's Creation and the four that are managing our band, and you go to Maskwasis, that's the four bands out there are who is managing our band out in Pigeon Lake, and they have lockdowns out there with security. They have all these great resources, food banks, all that. But on my reserve, we don't have a lockdown.
Right.
There's no security out there making sure you're staying home or checkpoints or anything like that, right? So that's one of the things on the reserves I see a lot of is they're having total lockdowns. You can't. They have checkpoints on the roads as you're going into the reserves, and they take your name. If you're leaving for a specific reason, they write it down, right? It's just going right back to the. Some people are comparing it to the pass system back in, back in like the 60s, 50s, all that, right?
Yeah.
Where Native people weren't allowed to leave the reserve, So it's
The water thing is shocking. It was shocking to me when I feel like the first time I realized that this country has not taken care of the water for our Indigenous people in all our Indigenous communities. I think I first heard about it because of Flint, Michigan. So Flint, Michigan had its issues with all of the water going on. and I'm cruising through Twitter, and I heard a bunch of Indigenous voices saying, "Oh, you don't like what's going on in Flint? Well, and it's shocking to me, and thinking about not having access to clean water while washing your hands being so important and all of that, and yeah, no, that's scary.
Yeah, it is.
Hmm. Um, okay, so I guess the next question, I mean, regarding climate itself, do you feel like you're starting to hear political leaders use, if not a Green New Deal terminology, they're talking about build back better, they're talking about creating climate jobs. I find some of that talk encouraging. I expect politicians of all stripes to lie to me. Some do it more than others, but all of them do it. Um, but when for example, Joe Biden talks about it in a way for the American president, um, where he expects to create jobs from this, and I feel like that's encouraging. Do you feel like anything encouraging is coming out of the political leadership, or do you not trust it? Or
Um, just to give a little context, like of the political systems that are they're pretty much colonial systems here in Turtle Island, and they're they pretty much they don't represent Indigenous people. It's an anti-Indigenous system to begin with, right? So it is hard to trust, right? Being an Indigenous person, because no matter who gets voted into power, Indigenous people are still going to be overrepresented in incarceration rates,
yeah,
apprehension rates, and they do that for a reason. It's a calculated effort to keep us in constant dysfunction. They don't want us to rise up, right? They want us to be traumatized, for generations to come, so they can continue holding on to that power over the land and the resources, right? But climate change, I really like Joe Biden and his plan.
yeah,
His like how Seth was saying in the last interview here, he was talking about the economics of it and how he's reallocating money. Like he's making a better effort than Canada is, right? He's putting money where it should be, and Canada is kind of lagging behind in that regard.
yeah.
But
Per capita, we're be like, it's easy for us in Canada to say, yeah, but we have a smaller economy. But when you do the per capita comparison, there's still, the Biden plan dwarfs anything we've heard out of Trudeau.
I think it was 1.7 trillion out of for 10 years he was talking about.
No,
So
something like
that's
that.
that's great. I love that, and we should be making that transition.
Hmm.
He's getting a lot of flack for it, just for saying that he's going to completely walk away from fossil fuels. Right? He got flack during his debate.
Yeah.
People were really on him about that. So I kind of hope he sticks to his word. There's also like what he's doing with Indigenous communities as well. He's going to add Indigenous voices onto his group there. So down in the States.
Yeah, it looks like it looks like it's going to be one of the most diverse administrations ever. In fact, his entire communications team are all women, of different from different cultures, which is incredible. Um, yeah, I mean, I feel like so much has changed in just such a short time, but like, if countries are going to do a stimulus program to rebuild things up, and that's still going to have to happen for every country, as far as I can tell, then you either grab the challenge that's right there, that you build that stuff, or you find a whole bunch of other stuff to build, and not address the problem at all, and that'll be the next fight. you know Um, okay, so let me. I frequently I talk about it myself, and I hear it that we need to listen to Indigenous voices, and I of course agree with that. I mean, I guess the challenge is I feel one of the things that COVID revealed to me is people you can't even make people care about themselves with COVID. Like, we have people protesting, wearing masks. We have people people won't even take the steps to protect themselves from COVID, a near future thing. And to me, sometimes on my darker moments, I'm like, how are you going to get them on climate when they can't even protect? They're going to marches with their kids. How are you going to get them onto this great big thing? And then I think about how can how can I get people like that to accept a worldview like the Indigenous worldview, and ask them to think like you, to even to listen to you. um like, I mean, you look at America, more people on the right wing voted for Donald Trump than for any other right wing president. Biden got more votes, but it shouldn't be forgotten that a huge number of people voted for that guy. And so we can't even get them to wear masks when it's their own immediate health. Then you think about doing things to save the world on climate, and then listening to Indigenous voices, and then you see the huge challenge. How do we make it easier to make people listen to the Indigenous knowledge?
I think it's already happening on social media platforms. A lot of times, like for centuries, settlers they didn't listen to Indigenous people. They had the option to just walk away and ignore, and just laugh it off. Go about their day in their own communities where we are, while we are stuck on reserves, kind of thing. And now it's all there in black and white on social media platforms. There's you go to any article online and you'll see about Indigenous issues, especially the media articles. And like some places like CBC, they had to shut down their comment sections because of the racism.
Yeah.
And people were just getting bombarded, and it's emotionally exhausting, to go through that, to just try and give your opinion, even suggestions, things like that, and you just get bombarded by people who are sitting in their mom's basement.
Yeah.
And, it's I'm glad they're a small minority, people like that. They're just a small percentage of the population. Most of the people are good, honest, hardworking people, decent people.
Yeah.
That want to see good things. They just want to live their lives and take care of their families and their friends,
Right.
right? And make a good living. But there's always that one little 1%. That's they seem to be the loudest out there. But we need more of these good, decent, hardworking people to step up and kind of police those people
Yeah.
that are making it more difficult, right? And that's where it's going to start, I believe. Is It's going to start in their homes, right? In everybody's homes, and at family dinner. That's And it's not going to start with us. It's people of European descent, Caucasian people. They have to do it for their own people, right?
Yeah.
They don't listen to us. We're even if we tell them the world is ending, we're destroying everything. It's They'll probably just laugh it off and make fun of us.
Well,
It's
yeah, it's tough. Like, the division is such that they don't listen to me either. There's a lot of times where I'm speaking to the converted, and even with my conservative brethren here in Alberta that I care about, that are my friends, and there's some of them where we can't talk about some things because I've lost my patience with them. I put my time in. They won't listen anymore. And so yeah, it's a challenge, but I
Yep.
mean, it's something that we have to get there somehow.
I think one of the things is we also have to prioritize our activism. You
Mhm.
know, no other issue is going to matter if our planet can't sustain life. So we have to kind of, you know, make sure our environmental activism, our climate, mobilizing for the climate crisis is right up front, all the time. And like, there's a lot of things, all these other issues that we see happening, the racial stuff, that those are important issues as well, but those aren't going to matter if the planet can't sustain life. So we got to just, keep on reminding people, get out there and talk with your family and your friends, and even right here on on a platform like this, getting people to, there's so many Indigenous people around the world. We're in the forefront, of the climate crisis, the fight,
Yeah.
because of the way we see our world, because of our worldviews. And yeah, that's getting people to think like that, right? I always encourage people to try out Indigenous studies class in university if you're going there. It really shifts how you see the world, right?
Yeah, I think University of Alberta is offering a free course, are they not?
Yeah, I think what's his name there? Dan Levy was talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was going hard about that, and I think it's great, but they're not all perfect, right?
Right.
They could be. Someone was just mentioned to me today. I posted one, and someone was telling me that it's it it's kind of the truth, but it's not really the truth, almost kind of type of thing, right? But
Right.
it's still it's better than what's been happening for the past 150 years. So it's people are starting to wake up and starting to realize, that Indigenous people, the original inhabitants of these lands, you know, they should have a voice. They should you know they shouldn't be the poorest people here in Canada. They shouldn't be the most overrepresented in jails and things like that, right?
And what you see is just about anywhere where there was an Aboriginal population, those jail numbers are similar, and all of the other things go with it. It is a colonial versus Indigenous. It's standard. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Australia or some any of the other areas where you had that culture before. You end up seeing the same things where we rolled in and tried to take everything we could, and that's how that worked. Um, Let me ask you. So you've mentioned about uh, putting climate activism to the forefront, and I'm glad you mentioned the way you did, um, because I can tell you right now within the hub, the whole time that I've been in the hub, and I've been there since the beginning, about the beginning, we have been conscious of where there's a lot of white faces around that table, and in fact, it can be white faces and an older generation, and we're I feel like climate groups are more likely to understand the diversity stuff, and to understand that you know we don't want to be another one of these things where it's all white people in it. We want to open the doors. And I feel like, if, for example, trying to reach out to Black Lives Matter or Idle No More and saying, guys, we want you in our group, come join us. It's I feel like, for example, with Black Lives Matter, they're protesting police killing people in the streets. How do I ask them to put that focus down and come with us and fight climate? Now, it's different with Indigenous, because Indigenous cultures, I don't want to use the term pioneer because that's probably a colonial language, but but you guys have been doing environment before environment was cool. So, I guess I want to know how I want an Indigenous voice on our board. I want a board member who is an Indigenous person. I want Indigenous voices wherever we can have them within, and sure, we do have a diversity node, and I was hoping to have that person on, the head of that node, come on to ask you a question. We've had a bit of a technical difficulty, so I don't think he's going to be able to. But it's not like you get hammered into the diversity node just because you are Indigenous. You could join whichever node you wanted to. But I mean, I guess how do we make ourselves more open as a viable option to bring Indigenous folks on board, as opposed to like them not just going directly to Idle No More? Or how do we partner? I don't know. I guess I'm looking for help. I'm looking for your help.
Yeah, like you said, I believe you were talking about collaborating with Fridays for Future, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the youth movements.
Yeah, we work closely with Fridays for Future.
Yes, there's a handful of people, environmental activists, Indigenous environmental activists around Calgary, and we'd be more than happy to join with you guys, collaborate with you guys anytime. And like your question about like the Black Lives Matter, how do we get them to to look at the climate crisis, right? Because they were really powerful this summer. I was
powerful as they've ever been.
Yeah, I was head of security there at the one there, and there was upwards of 5,000 people, 4,000 to 5,000 people marching down the streets. We marched all the way from the 10th Street Bridge down to 17th Ave, the Red Mile. We came back around to go to the COP, and it was huge, And I like to see that, as a Indigenous, I do a bit of anti-racism activism as well myself, and it was really nice to see, and they included Indigenous voices. It was all theirs, but it was nice. They didn't have to, but they gave us a little space to speak, and I just I made it brief because I know it was their time to shine, their words, and it was awesome. But that is a really great question, and that's something we'll have to really look into, because those movements, even the LGBTQ movement, 2S movement, they're huge as well, and that is a conversation that needs to be had. How do we get them, to come over to the environmentalism?
The thing, like, what I always think about is, what if all of us that cared about my hypothesis is that if you care about climate, you're more likely to care about equal rights for women. That's my hypothesis. And to be against racism and against, and I feel like clearly our best bet is if all of us, every group that cares about the right things, we all see ourselves as part of the same thing. And that's where I didn't know the word see, now it's escaped me now, the intersectionality. And so for a long time I didn't know the word, but I had been kicking around that, like, we have to come together, and so how does that start happening? I don't know what the answer is, but maybe you do. One thing I find encouraging is, like, when the term BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. Okay, so now that's a bigger group now than just, that's not three different silos anymore, right? And I feel like it'd be nice if we can it's the silos that are killing us. I don't know. What do you think?
Like, personally myself, I see it as all being interconnected. you got colonialism, you got patriarchy, you got white supremacy, part of my language, but that, those words, they're like nails on a chalkboard to some people, and there's colonialism, imperialism, racism, they're all connected here on Turtle Island, because you look at who started these countries, it's all been all white Christian males. And
Yeah.
if you're not white Christian or male in this country, then you're going to experience some difficulties. You're going to experience some barriers and some obstacles, right? So that's, like I said, to me, it's all connected. Intersectionality plays right into that, right? Because if you're a trans, Indigenous woman, for instance, you're right at the bottom of the ladder in society, right?
Yeah.
And if you're a white Christian male, you're right at the top, and you get you won't even see all the privileges that you're receiving, right? You live a great life, whereas if you're Indigenous, you'll have that historical trauma ingrained into your DNA, where your ancestors were being chased, being shot down, where they're being stolen from their families and thrown into residential schools, where they're being mistreated, abused, raped, and killed. Right? That's in that trauma involved. It's right inside your DNA. Um, so those are the kind of things. And then not only that, right when you're born into a world where your nation was invaded, and another colonial nation was built on top of that, where there's things like boil water advisories, and the high incarceration rates, apprehension rates, um, that there's all that. And then you deal with like the racism, where you're being excluded from certain places. You're even online, it's everywhere, right? So it is difficult to navigate, and it's like a vacuum of negativity. Growing up on reserves were actually pretty much, they were made as concentration camps, similar to the Japanese in the World War. That's exactly what reserve systems were made for, right? So you're born on a reserve, you're born in poverty, all these disadvantages, right? So there there's a lot of difficulties we have to overcome before we even get to the point some people are already born with the generational wealth, privileges, all these things, right? It's not an easy thing. Like for myself, in high school, I remember high school, every day I walk to my locker. I walk in the school doors and I turn left and I go out my locker's way at the end. There was a group of white boys standing here, 5 white boys. They would sit there, they'd give me that, "Ooh," all these things. They're calling me names, every name in the book I heard, as I walked every morning to my locker. And it got to me after a while, one day I snapped and I just attacked the guy, and then we went into the principal's office, and the principal was pretty much taking his side on everything. I told him what was happening. I even complained like a few weeks earlier, and then that happened. And that was my first experience with institutional racism, being up against a system, the person in charge of that school and those boys. I had years just undoing those knots of that experience, and now I'm going back to university, and at the age of 43, right? And it's never too late, to get out there and start helping people. Like if that wouldn't have happened, I always think of how would my life would have been if that wouldn't have happened. Would I have gone to university right out of high school and not turned in, been an alcoholic for 10 years, or just undoing those knots of that racism and those experiences. So those are just some of the things that we deal with as Indigenous people. Intersectionality, it ties right into that.
So I've enjoyed talking with you so much. I blew right through when my commercial time was, and so I'm going to get a few commercials in, and then I've got a couple more questions for you.
Perfect.
But on behalf of the Calgary Climate Hub, I'd like to take this moment to recognize the support of the Alberta Ecotrust Foundation, whose grant programs have helped bring forward so many great Alberta-specific environmental initiatives, including this broadcast. I should also mention they have gone virtual for their very influential environmental gathering event this year. The number of great sessions still available and coming up, including Indigenous protected and conserved areas, financing clean energy innovation, as well as the important work of sustaining ourselves while we fight this critical fight, maybe dealing with some of that eco-anxiety. Only the most important things that you could possibly imagine, right? So that's Alberta Ecotrust. Go and check them out. Their link is in the chat, and their great event series is online, and I believe those events are free. So go and check them out. You'll emerge smarter. I've gone to them before, and they're great. That's that portion. The other question, coming back to you, Maskwasis, you know, when we talk about building back better and we think about what kinds of things we'd like to see for Alberta, what's some of the low-hanging fruit do you think that you know, would be really good if we invested money in? We've got natural resources there. I know that in a lot of ways, I keep seeing great stories about Indigenous communities and solar. Are there other things that jump out to you on that you feel like if Alberta did this instead of just, you know, not changing a thing, we would be better off?
I think one of the things that really gets forgotten, we talk about solar, we talk about wind, we talk about hydro. I think one of the industries that really gets left out of conversation is the hemp industry, you know, because it's got like what, 50,000 uses or something like that.
Yeah.
And if we do, you know, like some of the very first vehicles Henry Ford made were made out of hemp. You know, it ran on hemp, and you know, I like what was that? I think it was Levi's, but they're making jeans out of hemp again.
Yeah.
I think that's really great. And you know, if we do turn that way, it can replace industries. You know, like it could pretty much replace 50 to 80% of the fossil fuel industry, even the paper industry as well, right? There's so many uses, so many applications for it. That's one area I would like to see Indigenous communities invest in. You know, you just make these big, huge buildings, you grow it in there, and you know, in the wintertime, summertime, you can grow it outside. Some places are great for that. They have the climate, you know, they have the soil for that. But for Indigenous communities, you know, I think we have a really good opportunity to be leaders in that regard, right? Because we have our own land base, we have a lot less red tape to deal with the government. But the only thing that's holding us back is our leaders. You know, like right now we have what was that pipeline, the KXL, Keystone XL pipeline?
Mm-hmm.
There's this natural law energy, I believe they call it. They were trying to invest $1 billion in that. And, you know, like just when I first heard that, you know, I think about natural laws as Indigenous person, and those are our sacred laws. Those are the most highest laws we have, you know, in Canada, excuse me. In Canada, they have the Constitution. For us, it's the natural laws, and those are laws that we can't break. There's like Pastahoan, where you don't break laws against anything other than a human, you know. So that's like animals, the earth, plants, things like that. You don't harm them, right? Those are really important things that are traditional leaders. Anybody who calls himself a traditional leader, they can't break those laws.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are, you know, you don't have the authorization to do that, to go and sign deals with pipeline companies, you know, for just pretty much selling out the land is what you're doing, right?
You know, I have to identify that what you've just mentioned parallels perfectly what Seth Klein, author of a good war, mobilizing Canada in the climate emergency. You saw that interview last week. The thing that is missing right now in Canada, taking up the climate fight, is our leaders. And so in the Indigenous world, it's the leaders. In the Canadian federal system, it's the leaders. And so that's the big commonality. That's the convergence. That's the challenge. It's the leadership.
Yeah, we got to stop giving power to people who don't believe in climate science or the science, and even worse yet, people who pretend not to believe it for their own interests, right? They're for their own self gain or whatever, right? I don't know. Maybe they're pandering for votes or whatever. But you can become president of the United States. You can become premier of Alberta just by pandering to to racist people or people who don't believe in science.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a big thing, They and then when they get into power, they make all these promises about jobs, and then we see exactly what's happening now. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's like he's not working for the people. He's working for big corporations and industries.
That's the whole deal.
So
I got a question that came in from this is the head of our diversity node. His name is Jeremy John Escobar Torrio. I was going to have him on as a panelist, but we had the technical difficulty. He asks, how can Indigenous leaders and communities engage newcomers to Canada on climate action? Do you have any ideas on that?
Like, how can we engage them? Because Indigenous people, we have very little say on newcomers that are coming into this country. Because most of them are coming here from war-torn countries, stuff like that, right? They're escaping bad economies, and they see Canada and they want to come here. And a lot of the times, I'm not sure. Like for myself, I look at it and I see a lot of the newcomers, the immigrants, the refugees. They're joining the colonial force that is oppressing Indigenous people. They're joining it just to get those crumbs,
Yeah.
and they take those roles, just to come get education, raise their families in a good place. But we have very Indigenous people, we have very little say on it, but there is blueprints for things like that with with the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous People, UNDRIP, with missing murdered Indigenous women, with just documents like that, bills like that. Those are blueprints that they basically the writers of those they address those things, right? But they're being ignored because that we live in a colonial country and they don't want to give us power. That's the first thing. I that's just the way I see it, though. I see that they're joining that force that oppresses Indigenous people. So why would they even listen to us? They're happy to come and get their little piece of the colonial pie.
Yeah, and there may be a thing where it's like there's the mainstream, and then there are the voices that are not heard from in the mainstream, and that like that's one of the ways we could look at it. One more question for you. I don't know whether there's an answer to this or not, but I am asking all of my guests this. I'm also a part of another initiative that I'm very happy to do with the Climate Hub. It's called the Community Climate Conversations. And we go to communities across Calgary and we bring experts with us and we let people hear from the experts very briefly. Then we scatter them throughout the room. And then you as an attendee can spend as much or as little time as you like with each of them and listening to them and hopefully talking with your community members. We've had maybe 20 by now. The last 3 or 4 have been, last 2 of them have been digital versions. But it's another thing where I feel like when I keep hearing, and I believe it, that the most climate impact you can, the most bang for your buck is at the community level, given, just your personal level doesn't have enough impact. Systemic takes a lot of work and effort and and more than a bit of luck for that to happen. But community, pound for pound, you can make that happen. And you can influence a community. You can change communities quickly as opposed to systems. And so I wonder if you have any advice on how to open up at the community level people to Indigenous learnings and Indigenous teachings.
Yeah, there's quite a few programs out there. I recently went to one braiding to sweetgrass. I'm not sure, but I'm actually what is that? It's called a hollow bone. Um, Healing Circle. Yeah, Hollow
Okay.
Bone Healing Circle here in Calgary. It's Indigenous people, and non-Indigenous people. We just sit down around a fire, or just get a group of people, and you just discuss all these things, right? And
Mhm.
it's really great to see that we had a few non-Indigenous people there, and you know, one actually he made a pipe, one of our sacred pipes. He made that himself, and then he gave it to one of the Indigenous people there because he didn't know what to do with it, right?
Right.
And the one guy there, he was a pipe holder, and he received that. So just things like that. It's encouraging to see. So those are some things, like just healing circles, like we were discussing earlier, taking an Indigenous studies class.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. You just sitting there and seeing all the non-Indigenous people there, and they were asked, I believe it was yesterday in our class, they were asked, what did you learn? They learned so much, like they weren't aware of, like how concepts of time, Gregorian time, calendars, stuff like that, right? Those are
Yeah.
colonial constructs, and people didn't know about these things, like residential schools, the treatment of just all around the world, Indigenous groups, how they were mistreated and taken advantage of, genocides, things like that, and how it's still ongoing today. I think that's yeah, I like to see that when people are out there willing to learn those things, right? Some people, they're not even in that conversation, they're not even in that frame of mind, or even want to understand what's happening there. But it's just great to see so many people, like we are talking about the one at U of A. They had some like 22,000 people there
Hmm.
in that class. So that's huge, just seeing people's willingness just to go and learn about that. So yeah, I encourage that, even anytime, anybody wants to speak with me, I'm always there just to come and help them understand a little better.
Hmm.
There's also great resources, like at the central library. They have elders there as well. You can
Right.
go there and speak with an elder if you have any questions, or even just let them explain a few things to you of Indigenous issues or Indigenous ways of being, knowing, worldviews, things like that. They're great resources out there.
Well, let me make an ask of you. When it becomes safe again, let me know of an event that your people are putting on that would welcome me, and I'd love to attend and experience and learn a little bit.
Yeah, there's with COVID, like you mentioned it, when it's safe, all
Yeah.
right. But you know, COVID just slowed everything down. Everybody's they're taking the precautions. They don't want to get anybody sick. They don't want to be super spreaders out there.
Right.
And but Indigenous issues, they happen. Like, you look at what happened with the Micmac people, the lobster issue out there,
Yeah.
the fishermen, and just things like that. Like Wet'suwet'en being invaded, by the RCMP. Just things like that just happen. And it's almost a monthly thing, right? And I don't know more. We're always there. Resistance campaign is always there. There's a bunch of, like I said last time, we work with Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion, and you know what, us collaborating, that's a really good thing. Just seeing the numbers we can get there. So when things happen in native country, in Turtle Island, we just jump on that, right? You have to, right? You can't just let it slide. And that's where the important work is being done with the organizers and the activists, that are out there in city halls, in town halls, and out there on the street, making organizing these rallies and protests right in front of TransCanada Energy, right in front of City Hall. They may not pay attention to us or pretend like they don't hear us, but when you got over 1,000 people marching down the street, screaming, drumming, and chanting, it's hard to ignore, right?
Yep.
And I always say, when you do that, let's just take up as much space and time as we can, and be as loud as we can, and make them hear us, right?
I like it. Okay, so we're almost, that's almost it for this week's or this month's Climate of Change. But Maskwasis, I want to continue the important dialogue that you and I have started tonight about Alberta, Indigenous leadership, and climate and intersectionality. And so, who do you think? Like, I don't want to be like, okay, I interviewed an Indigenous person, check the box. I want this to continue. So, are there other voices you think I should look to? I want to know who you recommend out of the Alberta Indigenous scene that you feel like, yeah, no, talk to them, Bentley.
There were a previous Idle No More, like the Idle No More that I'm a part of. We're almost a 2.0 version.
Mm-hmm.
There was a previous Idle No More. I believe it is Darlene McGuinness. Um, the names are escaping me right now.
You don't have to come up with it
But
right away. At any
yeah,
point, I'm interested.
there's Michelle Robinson. She's always great. I'm sure you guys probably know who she is. She's
Yeah.
all over the place doing everything. She's great at what she does. There's Heather Lucier. She's one of the co-founders of Idle No More 2.0. There's Francis Young. Yeah, there's just so many great speakers out there and great organizers, and I think they would be great to join with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just grateful that you had me on tonight. I want to thank you, Steve, Calgary Climate Hub, Alberta Ecotrust as well. So it's been a pleasure having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. I'll say to our to our viewers both tonight and of course via Facebook Live, and eventually this goes to YouTube as well, which means it lasts forever, or at least as long as YouTube does. Thanks for listening tonight. Thanks for coming out. We have the links for how you can connect with Idle No More on their website as well as on their Facebook. There is also some information about the hub, and I'll take a minute just to talk about the hub and why you should consider joining it. What I like to say is that I like to quote Joan Baez, who said the antidote to despair is action. And what I can tell you is when I look outside the window and the smoke is so thick that the sun is this bright red, unnatural, otherworldly orb, I can feel pretty down about that. And that can affect my ability to do anything worthwhile that day. And what I can tell you is being a member of an organization that's focused on fixing that and moving the ball and partnering up with other great organizations like Idle No More, that helps that. That slays that because it makes you feel like you're not powerless. So what I would say to you is if you don't have a climate organization in your life, get one. You need it. It's for your own good. And so for the Calgary Climate Hub, you can go to our website. We've got links in the chat. You can become a member and you can join one of our great nodes looking to influence the city or looking to form intersectional bonds or looking to create diversity within the climate movement. There's a bunch of different nodes. You'll find something you like in there and we'll take you and we could use your help. And if you can't, you don't have the time, I get it, but maybe you got a few extra bucks. And I'll say that the climate dollar is one of the toughest dollars in Alberta, as you can possibly maybe imagine. So we could certainly use that kind of support as well. Other than that, again, I'll just thank once more Alberta Ecotrust for their grant funding of this initiative. We couldn't do it without you. I want to thank Dave Burden, my tech support and producer this evening, as well as Joan, Pamela, and a host of folks at the hub. I'm just the figurehead. There's a lot of people that make this thing happen. Thanks again to Maskwasis. I feel like I've made a friend that I want to keep coming back and talking to. And finally, I want to thank you, the viewer. So good night for now, and let's get to work.
Thanks for everything.
You bet. We'll see you.